Analysing the Trump Effect, how the New York businessman went from distant outsider to Republican frontrunner. Also on today's program, 5 years after Mubrarak fell, is Egypt any better off? And in Picture This, Snowmageddon. A record-breaking blizzard causes chaos in the US. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. Polarized politics in the US are nothing new, but there's one man whose presidential race is polarizing not only conservatives and liberals, but is actually driving a wedge straight down the middle of the Republican Party. Donald Trump, the latest phenomenon to hit US politics, started his bid for the presidency with few seeing him as a real frontrunner. But now, just 10 months before America chooses its 45th president, Donald Trump's race for the White House is gaining traction. But could the man who claims he could shoot someone and not lose voters really be the next president of the United States? Today's newsmaker is Donald Trump, as we ask if he really is what he says he stands for, or is he simply playing to the fears and paranoias of US society?
I'm Donald Trump, and I'm running for president.
Total and complete shutdown of Muslims.
So much winning.
The Second Amendment, boom, guns.
I am so tired of this politically correct.
Love him or loathe him, there's one thing American voters can agree on. Donald Trump has shaken up the presidential race.
President Donald Trump knows how to make America great.
The billionaire tycoon continues to cement his status as the Republican frontrunner, blowing his rivals out of the water. The latest polls have Trump receiving 35% of the national GOP vote. His closest rival, Ted Cruz, trails behind with 18%. As Trump courts the electorate, his tactics are leaving many people in Washington perplexed.
The Trump campaign for months now has had a dustbin of history-like quality to it. From the vacuous sloganeering to the outright lies to even the fake hair, the whole carnival barker routine that we've seen for some time now.
Can a man who's been called impulsive, offensive, and a racist really have a shot at the White House? Polarization has become a defining feature of the U.S. political landscape. A survey by the Pew Research Center found that Republicans and Democrats are further apart ideologically than at any point in the last 2 decades. Partisan animosity in Congress has also increased over the same period, with each party sharing a highly negative view of the other, a stumbling block for President Obama's reform efforts.
It's one of the few regrets of my presidency that the rancor and suspicion between the parties has gotten worse instead of better.
Other trends to note, fewer Americans are now in the middle of the political spectrum, with values shifting further to the left or right, and a growing dissatisfaction with government officials. That's pushing the public to look for Washington outsiders, a description that fits Donald Trump.
He's not a politician, he's a businessman, he's a leader, and he also has a lot of relationships around the world.
His brutal honesty, his willingness to want to fix America, want to fix the problem, and not leave it and put it underneath the rug like everybody else has.
In the next 6 months, Republican delegates will narrow the field before July's national convention. With establishment favorites falling by the wayside, the stage is set for fringe candidates to steal the show. The emergence of Donald Trump and second-place Ted Cruz reveals the factions within the party and indeed Middle America. Both men are seen as divisive populists, more likely to burn bridges than heal wounds. At this stage, many Republicans on Capitol Hill could be preparing for a nominee who can grab headlines, but not the Oval Office. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss the Trump effect on the Republican Party in Washington is Ron Meyer. He's editor of Red Alert Politics. And in Oxford is Theodore Roosevelt Malloch. He's a senior fellow in management practice at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford and informal advisor to the Donald Trump presidential campaign. Gentlemen, good of you to join us. Good to get two conservative voices discuss this phenomenon. Let me start with you, Theodore Roosevelt Malloch, if you can hear me, sir.
Sure.
Is Donald Trump a demagogue and a showman and a businessman who's just gaming the game and on the joyride of his life, and at some point this is going to end, or does he actually believe the stuff he's saying?
Well, I think probably 6 months ago, a lot of people, a number of pundits believed what you said, but he's proven them all wrong, and now he's viewed, even within the establishment, I think today, as a very serious potential contender for the White House. It's looking more and more likely, some would say even inevitable after the first three primaries, that he will be the Republican nominee, in which case then there'll be, I predict, a fairly strong coalition behind him, which will cross over party lines. So his candidacy is more viable than ever.
His candidacy is more viable than ever. Ron, what do you think?
Well, I mean, if you look at the polling, we're going to lose a whole generation of millennial voters. He only has a 17% approval rating among millennials, 50% disapproval. If we want to kiss the future of the Republican Party goodbye, we'll nominate Donald Trump. I actually don't disagree that if he does win those first three primaries, it may be inevitable. But what I would ask is for Republican voters and for conservatives who care about our future to really reconsider. Because if you look at what Donald Trump's doing, he's only has a certain segment of the population. He's not really investing in the future of the party. He's not appealing to the people who are going to make up the future of the American electorate, of the future of the Republican Party. And that's going to put us in some real trouble. And the other thing is, if you're a conservative, I'm not sure how you really can support Donald Trump because he's flipped on major policy positions. The only thing he's been consistent on is foreign policy and trade. And on trade, he's not a conservative. He's a protectionist. And so if you're looking at, if you care about conservative values, I don't think he's your candidate.
Theodore, if you care about conservative values, how can he be your candidate?
Well, we had this critique from George Will. We had the same critique from National Review last week when 22 intellectual conservatives criticized Donald Trump. I think that he's proving them all wrong. I mean, this is a new kind of conservatism, a much more, if you will, pragmatic conservatism. It's a conservatism that much more populist in nature. And I think a lot of those arguments are frankly being washed away. So that when you see Trump actually in the polls ahead by more and more as a result of their critiques, I think what you have is a dissatisfaction in the American populace, and that cuts across all swaths of the population, both on the left and the right. I think you'll find Trump actually appealing a lot to working class Democrats, to African American voters, even to the trade unions. So it's a quite interesting and I would say unique phenomenon. We haven't seen it certainly in any recent American political theater.
Theodore, when he said, he more than implied that Mexicans were rapists and that he wants to build a wall. When he said that let's keep Muslims out of America, let's ban them, many outsiders see this as rude, as arrogant, as racist. There's even an internet meme comparing him to Biff from Back to the Future with the almanac. You can understand why, can't you?
Well, I think that's a caricature. First of all, you have to understand what he said, and what you've just quoted is not what he said. He's actually opposed to illegal immigration into America. It's not just from Mexico, although there is a strain of illegal immigrants coming from South America, Central America, and Mexico. So we have to stop that illegal immigration. You can't have a country without secure borders. What he said about Muslims was not anti-Muslim, and he's certainly not anti-Muslim. What he said is we have to put a temporary hold on immigration visas after what happened in San Bernardino. I think that could be fixed probably within 30 days if we took the seriousness that he's suggesting to put a fix in that system. It has nothing to do with Muslims per se.
No, he actually said we need to put a...
Well, and
he said we need to put a hold on immigration visas for Muslims. I mean, these are not my words, these are his.
He said, Well, his words, and I have talked to him about it, and his advisors, are that we need a temporary freeze on immigration from Islamic countries until we can fix the visa problem that obviously has brought certain kinds of activity, terroristic activity, to the American shores. It's actually quite a sane idea, not an insane idea.
Ron,
you have to fix what's broken.
Okay, Ron Meyer,
Well,
is he? Let me ask you this. Let me ask you: is he creating fears? Is he capitalizing on fears, or is he maybe just providing a mirror to fears that already exist? Whether we talk about Muslims or Mexicans or beyond, what do you think, Ron?
You just put it, you just put it very clearly. You listed off a whole bunch of statements, which may or may not be misconstrued, but the fact is that most of the world has misconstrued them, and most of America has misconstrued them. Do we want a president that's constantly misconstrued or making semi-gaffes? I don't think so. We need someone who's clear, someone who can lead, someone who can inspire, not play on the fears of America or the fears of the world, but play to our best instincts. And if we're really truly going to make America great again and actually build a future vision for this country, we need someone who's going to lead us and bring out the best qualities in us, not the worst.
Theodore, how will Trump make America great again?
Well, he's written this book, which I suggest to you and to your readers, called Crippled America, where he suggests we've actually put ourselves at a disadvantage. So we need to fix a number of things in order to, and to use his vernacular, build America again. He is a builder and an entrepreneur. So this isn't normal political language. This is more like business speak. You have to fix the tax code. You have to fix the infrastructure. You have to make America more productive.
Now, you've touched on this, Ron, that he has caused an earthquake in the Republican Party. Just how fractured is it right now because of the Trump phenomenon?
Well, I'm not really sure how fractured it is. I think if you look at the polling numbers, a lot of Trump supporters are coming from outside the Republican Party. They're people who haven't voted in the Iowa caucus or the New Hampshire primary before. If you look at people who've actually voted Republican in the past, Trump isn't winning in the polls. But this whole thing, and actually I think Theodore played into this, is he's bringing new people into the party that have been disaffected. But the question is that the future of the party or the past of the party?
What about the generations to come?
Well, here's the point. All voters have one vote. It doesn't matter what age they are, what color they are, where they come from in a democratic system. So I think Trump is appealing to a large number of people. He'll bring some people in that haven't been part of the party. Look, in an American political system, I'm just saying this objectively, and I've been part of it for about 3 decades, you always have primaries, both on the Democratic and on the Republican side, that try to mobilize those bases. Those bases are much more ideological, much more polarized, much more partisan than the general election.
Ron, who's going to get the nomination?
Well, I think honestly, Trump does have the advantage right now. Probably number 2 would be Cruz. And really, whoever gets second place in New Hampshire will have the best shot at taking out Donald Trump. Really, it's a race for second in New Hampshire. Then whoever gets second in New Hampshire is going to get the majority of the establishment money, the majority of mainstream conservative money. And then hopefully, my hope is that it'll be Donald Trump versus whoever that is. But my fear is that it'll be Donald Trump, Ted Cruz, and whoever gets second in New Hampshire. In a 3-way race, that really does favor Donald Trump. But I will leave with this. Donald Trump his ceiling has been 40% of the vote, and obviously that's way more than any other Republican candidate so far. But there are 60% of Republican voters who really haven't considered voting for him, and that's a really scary thing going into a convention. And we still could have a broken convention. If he consistently gets 40% of the vote all the way through, and 60% of the vote goes to other candidates, the other candidates could unite against him. And frankly, I think a lot of Republicans, including myself, would be willing to see a brokered convention to stop the travesty that will be Donald Trump for our party.
Theodore, final thoughts from you. If he goes all the way and gets the nomination, and then if he becomes president, as a Trump supporter, what's your message to those Americans who say, that's it, I'm getting the hell out of here, I'm moving to Canada? What would you say to them?
I think that's not only very unlikely, but very laughable. He is a conservative. He has been a conservative. He has conservative positions. He's a doer, not a politician. He's an outsider, not an insider. He obviously challenges the establishment, but I think eventually they too will come around because they don't have another
hold on
candidate.
a second. How is he an outsider? He is a consummate insider. He's donated to almost every single politician on both sides of the aisle in this whole city. I'm in Washington, D.C. Hold on a second. He has given to politicians, and here's the other thing. He has used eminent domain and bought off politicians for his land deals.
I'll use my time and not beg for some of yours, but his conservative backers' long and growing list. You know, when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, and I was around and part of that, he had a candidate named George Bush challenging him from the establishment, and he beat him, and a lot of people made the same statements about Ronald Reagan that they're making about Donald Trump now. If you think about what he did in his administration.
By the way, who didn't support Ronald Reagan.
So if you think about what Trump would actually do as a president, I think that you'd find an active, positive president who actually brought America back from its death spiral, both economically and had a very, very different foreign policy that engaged the world and put America first.
Okay, I'll let that be the final word, gentlemen. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, Theodore Roosevelt Malloch and Ron Meyer. Thank you. Still to come on the Newsmakers, is Egypt better off 5 years after the revolution that toppled Hosni Mubarak? And in Picture This, historic snowstorms bring parts of the US to a standstill. Today marks 5 years since the beginning of the Egyptian uprising, which eventually toppled former President Hosni Mubarak. Since then, the country has suffered from extreme political turbulence, a military coup, and political apathy. Now a human rights group says that state repression in Egypt is the worst it has been for decades. The Newsmakers' Ashraf Helmi looks back at how the country reached where it is today.
January 25th, 2011, a key moment in Egypt's modern history. An uprising that had people demanding democratic change. The protests that started in Tunisia would become known as the Arab Spring, and they'd sweep over Egypt, a country that had endured 3 decades of rule under one man, Hosni Mubarak. Over the next 5 years, the country would undergo political upheaval. Free elections would bring to power Mohamed Morsi, but a military coup backed by public support would later remove him and install Egypt's current president and former general, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. After 4 years of political paralysis, Egypt once again has a parliament. Sisi came to power 2 years ago. During that time, he announced more than 300 decrees, and now he's given members of parliament just 15 days to ratify all of them. Some are controversial. MPs have already approved an anti-terrorism law that allows military courts to try civilians on terrorism-related charges. The same law protects security services when they employ what the government calls proportionate use of force. It also allows journalists to be fined thousands of dollars for contradicting the official version of any militant attack. Last year, police cracked down on opposition activists. Many were members of the banned Muslim Brotherhood. Tens of thousands have been arrested. Non-governmental organizations in Egypt say 475 people died at the hands of police. 640 were victims of police torture, and a further 464 were detained by the security services and are currently unaccounted for. Under a draft law, the four-finger sign used by supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood will be banned. As Egyptians mark the day they took to the streets to call for democratic change, political power has become concentrated in the hands of one man. Mubarak, Morsi, and now Sisi have all been accused of acting like all-powerful leaders. And as this country's history shows, that's something Egyptians know all too well. Ashraf Helmi, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to analyze the legacy of the revolution is Thanasis Kambanis, author of the book Once Upon a Revolution, An Egyptian Story, and a fellow at the Century Foundation. Thanks a lot for joining us, Mr. Kambanis. Was everybody
Great to be with you.
Was everybody naive 5 years ago?
Well, in some ways, the most naive amongst us were those who didn't expect the Egyptian people to ever rise up against the dictators that ruled them. The hopes of those days in January are long shattered, and as you just went in great detail, it's been a series of disappointments, really, and sort of tragic rollbacks of the hopes for reform or change or transparency. But actually, I think the obituaries for the January Revolution are quite premature, and we have to remember we're really at the early part of a generational historical change in Egypt, and we still don't know where it's going to end.
Who do you blame more? Do you blame the military for never having truly left, or maybe the Muslim Brotherhood for ruling badly and giving the military an easy opportunity to snatch back power?
I think if we're going to be fair and honest and take a clear historical perspective on this, we have to always lay the lion's share of the blame on the military and its dictatorial tendencies. They're the ones who crushed the revolt. They're the ones who toppled Morsi. They're the ones who have held Egypt's liberties and economy in a stranglehold since 1952. So the other parties you mentioned both have a share of the blame, but it's far less of a share of the blame. Morsi did a terrible job as president, but let's remember, he never even came close to controlling the security apparatus of the state. He was a sort of supporting actor to the deep state controlled by the Egyptian military. And the revolutionaries that you mentioned are also important. They failed to really come up with an alternative and articulate a compelling political ideology for the uprising. That's not why they were crushed, but that is a problem they have to overcome before the next uprising if they're going to have any chance of success.
Can Egypt under Sisi ever reform into anything resembling a democracy, or does there need to be another uprising and another revolution?
Well, long before we can talk about Egypt becoming a democracy, we have to ask, can Egypt be governed effectively? Just the basics, food, security, shelter, and maybe a modicum of transparency and freedom of expression. On those factors, on that basis, Sisi is failing abysmally. So the question of the next uprising for me is more just a question of timing. It's inevitable in outcome. And right now what I see is a very painful scenario in which misrule, incompetence, and repression by Sisi make a rupture, a popular uprising, or possibly another coup inevitable. But the outcome of that next challenge to central authority is not going to be a positive one because we don't have a coherent opposition that is cohering and beginning to prepare to take over from Sisi. And that is as a design of the state oppression that Sisi has engineered. So he's trying to forestall a challenge to his rule by saying, hey, if you topple me, it's going to be chaos. And yet he's doing such a poor job that there will inevitably be such a challenge, and it will be followed by some version of chaos and probably yet another strong man destined to do poorly.
Thanasis Kambanis, that was really thought-provoking. Thank you very much for joining us. In today's Picture This, the east coast of the United States has been crippled by Storm Jonas. The second largest recorded blizzard in U.S. history has left many people stranded and without power. Take a look. Today's newsmaker has been Republican presidential hopeful Donald Trump. Based on his promise to make America great again, he has won considerable support. But is he sowing the seeds of hate and paranoia? Fellow Republicans have condemned the billionaire's controversial approach. Jeb Bush described Trump's immigration comments as extremely ugly, while Rick Perry called him a cancer on conservatism. Trump has been accused of racism, sexism, and of spreading hate and paranoia. But if the businessman from New York is able to claim victory at the Iowa caucus, the Republican Party and U.S. politics might need to prepare for a shakeup. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.